Hello, I'm Jesse Berger, founder and artistic director of Red Bull Theater. Thank you for joining us for this remarkable Podversation. These informal conversations investigate approaches to essential passages from the Shakespearean and Jacobean canon and beyond with some of the finest actors working in classical theater today. Tonight's guest certainly qualifies as one of the finest, so much so that we were all set to bestow her with our Matador Award for Achievement in Classical Theater at our annual gala this March. That celebration had to be postponed, unfortunately, but I am very grateful that the amazing Kate Burton has agreed to join us tonight for this conversation. Kate has played Viola, Juliet, Desdemona, Isabella, Volumnia, and more. In 2018, she was lauded for her Prospera at the Old Globe in San Diego, which she will discuss tonight with your remarkable host, Red Bull's associate producer, Nathan Winkelstein. Over to you, Nathan.
Hi, everybody. My name is Nathan Winkelstein. I'm not at all certain if you can see me right now. I'm having some technical difficulties, but I am your host, and we may do it from an audio standpoint only. This is Remarkable Podversation. And tonight we are going to be discussing The Tempest with Prospero or Prospera in this particular case from William Shakespeare's The Tempest, and specifically Act 5, Scene 1, the I'll drown my book speech. We are going to be having this conversation with an extraordinary guest tonight. She is a 3-time Emmy nominee and a 3-time Tony nominee and classical theater royalty. She is, of course, the wonderful Kate Burton. Hi, Kate.
Hi there.
I believe that we are coming back to life from a technical standpoint.
Good.
So we may be able to, move forward. And in the meantime, we can ignore my silly video. So I'm just going to give them a little tiny bit of what's going on in the story for the little bit that we're going to give them so they know what's going on.
Right.
Act 5, Scene 1. And at this point, Prospera, the deposed Duke of Milan, or as the purists put it, Milan, thanks, Jesse, is living on an island that she had been banished to, where she has gained a number of supernatural powers and has drawn her estranged brother, who took over the dukedom from her, to this island with the titular Tempest. Mm-hmm. At this point, she is waiting to have her final confrontation with her brother, and most of the previous parts of the play have been very much about how she is going to pursue her vengeance on this brother who has done her wrong. Mm-hmm. And at this point in the play, she is conversing with her ethereal servant Ariel about what will happen, and she comes to a remarkable discovery and undergoes an extraordinary shift.
Mm-hmm. She sure does. So here we go. We're going to read.
Yes, and I will be able to read my script.
Fantastic. So here we go. Prospera, and Ariel. Say, my spirit, how fares the king and his followers?
Confined together, in the same fashion as you gave in charge, just as you left them, all prisoners, sir. Him that you termed, sir, the good old Lord Gonzalo, his tears run down his beard like winter's drops from eaves of reeds. Your charm so strongly works him that, if you now beheld them, your affections would become tender.
Dost thou think so, spirit?
Mine would, sir, were I human.
And mine shall. Hast thou, which art but e'er a touch, a feeling of their afflictions, and shall not myself, one of their kind, be kindlier moved than thou art? Though with their high wrongs I am struck to the quick, yet with my nobler reason 'gainst my fury do I take part. The rarer action is in virtue than in vengeance. They being penitent, the sole drift of my purpose doth extend, not a frown further. Go, release them, Ariel. My charms I'll break, their senses I'll restore, and they shall be themselves.
I'll fetch them, sir.
Ye elves of hills, brooks, standing lakes and groves, and ye that on the sands with printless foot do chase the ebbing Neptune and do fly him when he comes back. You, demi-puppets that by moonshine do the green sow ringlets make, whereof the ewe not bites, and you whose pastime is to make midnight mushrooms that rejoice to hear the solemn curfew, by whose aid, weak masters though ye be, I have bedimmed the noontide sun, called forth the mutinous winds, and twixt the green sea and the azured vault set roaring war. To the dread rattling thunder have I given fire, and rifted Jove's stout oak with his own bolt. The strong-based promontory have I made shaken by the spurs, plucked up the pine and cedar. Graves at my command have waked their sleepers oped, and let him forth by my so potent art. But this rough magic I here abjure. And when I have required some heavenly music, which even now I do to work my ends upon their senses, which this airy charm is for, I'll break my staff, bury it certain fathoms in the earth, and deeper than did ever plummet sound, I'll drown my book. Wow. Been 2 years since I've done that. Heavens to Betsy. Oh, what a great experience. Thank you so much for having me do it again. I don't know if you're going to ask me questions, so I'm happy to expound.
Here, hi, Kate. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Hi. This is going to be a fascinating podversation. I always hoped that this would be a podcast, and it looks like it's going to be from my perspective.
Okay.
So I've always been told I have a face made for radio, so this should work out fine.
It's not true. So not true.
That was absolutely wonderful, Kate. I am so sorry that I missed this performance of yours. I was reading a whole bunch of reviews in preparation for this interview, and it just sounded like a truly extraordinary production of one of Shakespeare's, perhaps this is maybe a little bit of an extreme statement to make, but the most difficult of his most revered plays.
Yes, that's a very good way of putting it. It certainly is. Yes, because this is some people who love Shakespeare, this is their favorite play. And I'm always so like amazed. I'm like, really? Oh my God. No, not because it isn't incredible, but because of the fact that it is the way it's structured is so different than so many of his what we consider his most revered plays. And it is, it starts off with this mad, shipwreck. And then it goes into what is probably a 20-minute monologue of Prospera telling her daughter Miranda, basically the story of her life and why they're on the island. And it's so expositional. It's one of the hardest tasks in the world, the beginning, the very first scene. And then Prospero leaves for like an hour, over an hour. And so all the adrenaline, and this is, I'm just talking totally as an actor, all the adrenaline that you work up, and you get to that kind of incredible aria at the beginning of the play, and then suddenly you're off stage for an incredible period of time, except for two kind of tiny little entrances where Prospero is watching what goes on. You're sort of in the background watching. And then you come back on, and then the minute you come back on, you don't leave the stage again until the end of the play. And then it's like a complete tour de force, which is so weird because most of Shakespeare's great leading roles, like Hamlet, has the sort of, before he has the 11 o'clock number, he gets to have, a nice sandwich backstage, a cup of tea before he goes back on. So there's no break. I mean, there's this huge break and then there's no break. So having played a lot of Shakespeare's greatest female roles, I was used to sort of having it pace it out a little bit. It was really, really challenging to figure out how to do that. And I know, I've never spoken to Sam Waterston or Blair Brown, who's played it as a woman, or any of our other great Prospero friends. But wow, what a huge undertaking it is. And of course, I can't wait to do it again. So what can I tell you?
So let me ask, I am very interested in getting to because of course there are two obvious things that stand out that might explain the brilliance of your Tempest. One of them being your brilliance, the other one being, but the other one being like the discoveries and the special way of being able to look at it that comes with playing the character as a mother instead of as a father.
As a father, yeah.
And would you say, what would you say were, because I have to imagine this was intimidating to be asked to do, what were the ins for you? Did you find that working this character as a mother was an advantage to you?
Yes, totally. I in fact, to be honest, felt that it worked almost better in some weird way because of the fact that Prospero is so anxious about her daughter Miranda losing her virginity before her time, so anxious about how she treats Ferdinand, the suitor, the King of Naples' son. It feels so much more motherly to me. But of course, I was playing the part, so I was making it all about my own experience. But there was something sort of remarkable of being a single mother, feeling like you're on an island. You're also a magician, a witch. You are creating this extremely, this speech that you've just heard is a spell. It's an incantation. And it was having brought up my daughter as a single mother and then having my very naughty stepchild, kind of, my adopted child, Caliban, who's such a troublemaker, and then having this extraordinary, ethereal, other kind of good but impish child, Ariel. So I have these three children that I've brought up by myself on this island. And there was something about particularly the very first scene that happens between all of them. It felt so natural. It felt so, as so often with Shakespeare, felt so contemporary. And I it just gave me lenses into who this character was. At first, as I was telling you, Nathan, I was so daunted by how large the character was. But once I got on the emotional roller coaster, as this happens with all the parts I play, I was able to take her in and able to learn it very easily. But I will tell you that particularly those great scenes with Caliban and Ariel and Miranda, but those scenes, like I felt like, oh, I know who she is now. I know where I am. I know sort of what my role is, because I truly believe that often as an actor, the biggest task you have is to really figure out what your role is in the play. What is your task in the play? And to really follow the roadmap of the playwright. And, I've been so blessed to have worked with this amazing playwright. And as it happens, in many of his later plays. I mean, as a young actress, I worked on a lot of his earlier plays, but as an older actress in the last 25 years, I would say I've almost entirely worked on his Jacobean plays. So it's interesting.
Do you have I know we mentioned it briefly when we were prepping for this. And of course, because of course my ear was caught by the fact that you've been doing a lot of the Jacobean Shakespeare plays because of Red Bull Theater's mission.
Right.
But especially just listening to the complexity of the domestic life of this character in some ways, I don't think people often expect to hear Caliban referred to as a child figure.
Yeah.
Do you think that the fact that you are doing Jacobean plays now has to do partially with your maturity as a performer and Shakespeare's maturity as a writer as he grew and wrote these more convoluted, complex
He wrote more, look, obviously, and one of the greatest things that's happened to all of us ladies is that we're getting to play some of the roles originally written for men, which is only right, let's face it, as all the female roles were played by young men. So, thanks to Harriet Walter breaking down that door, we all have had an opportunity. Yes, I mean, I would say as one gets into a certain age, I'm 62, and the truth of it is, I think truly, until my late 30s was when I did probably The Winter's Tale. And then I made my way through different plays, but I've also started to play not only more mature characters, but also male characters. Because in Cymbeline, which I did 4 years ago now. Wait a minute. Yes, I think that's right. Yes. Maybe 5. Oh my goodness. I think it's 5 years ago. I played the Queen in the first half, and then I returned as probably one of my most favorite parts I've ever played, Belarius, the adopted father of the 2 princes. So, and that was an extraordinary, but that I played as a man. And Dan Sullivan, our amazing director, he just was so determined to make me as much of a man as he could. And I'm such a girl, so it was quite a task. But we really did it. We really pulled it off. I had the time of my life. And then, last summer I got to play Volumnia in Coriolanus, which was one of the greatest experience, another great experience. So I feel like I've had in the last 5 years 3 unbelievable experiences playing Shakespeare, all Jacobean Shakespeare.
You've just mentioned sort of both sides of it between your Prospera and the character you played in Cymbeline, which, by the way, was the first show I ever saw you in. Well, I have to ask this question. This is a wonderful question that you see popping up on the screen. Then I'll get to mine. Have you ever contemplated, speaking of wonderful male roles, playing Lear?
Well, no. The answer to that question, no, I have not. But, I feel like, and this is the thing that's amazing about, I'm not ashamed to admit it. I'm just kind of getting to know Lear. I've seen some great Lears. I've seen some amazing Lears. And I was blessed to see Glenda Jackson last spring. I saw Christopher Plummer with the great production from Stratford, Canada.
Was that the one Des directed?
I think it was. It was yes, and it was at Lincoln Center. They brought it to Lincoln Center at the Beaumont. Beautiful. Oh my God! I mean, that was really my first Lear. So, and I kind of grew up knowing Christopher Plummer. So I thought, holy moly! And then I loved watching John Lithgow in the park, and I teach Shakespeare at the University of Southern California, and my students said we really want to read King Lear. When we went into Zoom, as we've all been, they said we'd like to read King Lear. They asked me, and I was like, let's do it. And it was extraordinary reading it, just absolutely reading it with all my young students, all in their early 20s. And yes, who knows what the future will hold? Perhaps there's a future moment of me having a go at King Lear. I mean, thank you, Glenda Jackson. I mean, honestly, thank you thank you to, Vanessa Redgrave for taking on Prospera in the film. And Blair Brown it wasn't Vanessa, it was Helen Mirren. So thank you to Helen Mirren. I mean, there's, all our great ladies. I mean, thank you, British actresses for helping us move along. But it's been certainly on my radar. I've been asked to play King John. I've been asked to play Henry IV, which I'd really like to do. I was very taken by my great friend Gary Hines, the great Irish director. She did the Henriade. And with her great Irish company Druid, and they did Richard II, Henry IV Parts 1 and 2, and Henry V in 2 nights. And it was a thrilling experience. That was a thrilling thing. So, you know, I've got my eye. I got my eye on a lot of them, but there are some great female roles too. I think there's a Queen Margaret there. I think I have to bite my teeth into. But yeah, there's I'm keeping my eye on the older female roles as well.
Can I ask? I think I'm actually going to. We have a couple of guests who gave questions before arriving, and one of them had a couple of them had questions actually specifically about playing Prospera as a woman, and one I think we've mentioned slightly, but I'd be curious to hear your specific take on it. Jessica, if you could bring Mim on to join us to ask her question.
Hi, Mim.
Hi. Yeah, I kind of got covered there, but I was lucky enough to play Prospero 2 years ago.
Oh, great! Oh no, I've lost you.
Man, you know, and I wasn't sure how we were going to do it at first, whether we were going to do it as a woman or a man. But I was playing it as a man, and I was wondering about the relationship with Miranda playing it as a woman, because me, some of when the way the character Prospero is manipulating her and, you know, kind of shoving her aside, don't talk to me, and, you know, the way she treats Miranda, and you know, we're used to seeing royal men treating young daughters as pawns, but I wondered whether did you have any? Didn't sound like you had much trouble reconciling it, but I wasn't sure if the audience felt differently about it.
Yeah, that's so interesting. That's such a great, I mean, there were times where I actually found learning Prospera hard because I thought it's written for a man. You know, this is like really hard. Like, and then I thought, okay, you know, so I would just torture myself there slightly. But in terms of the way you describe the sort of dismissal, there's a few times in the play, she's very dismissive of Miranda. She does shove her aside. She does. And the way I kind of attributed that to her having been, you know, all things to all her 3 crazy different children is that she had to do so much. And she, you know, and I think that, let's face it, there are anger issues, you know, there are anger issues with our Prospera. And so I felt that it was just in order to sort of pull off what she does as just a human being, as a parent, she needs to be really rough sometimes. And because she deals with, you know, let's face it, I mean, her brother wanted her to die on that ship when he dispatched her. And so she survived. And the only reason she did survive was because of Gonzalo, in our case, Gonzala. So, but it was, yes, I did initially have I did have a tough time kind of wrapping my head around it. But then I thought about some of the other great sort of terrible moms I've played. And not that I Prospero by any stretch of the imagination is a terrible mom, but, you know, I've played Arkadina and the Seagull, you know, I've played rough moms, you know, so, and I'm not, in real life, I'm like the most soft touch mom. If my kids were listening, they probably, you know, I am. So I often end up playing actually in my roles, something so very far away from me. But yes, that's a very good question. I think it makes sense in terms of the male, in terms of the father being sort of not understanding what it is to be a young woman. And in a way, it's also that notion of, if you think about all the trouser roles in Shakespeare, Viola, Rosalind, Imogen, and Cymbeline, and what it is you have to do in the world in order to succeed. You have to put on trousers. You have to put on a jacket. You have to pretend that you're a man. So there were all those things were at play for me when I was taking her on. But that's a great point.
Thank you, Mim. Thank you. And Jesse, we can let Mim off the hook. Yeah, thank you. And Kate, I think that this is a good moment to, I'm sure that it comes into play, being played as a mother, but to move specifically to the end of the play. We've talked a little bit about the beginning and the setup, and this extraordinary moment that happens with one of the people that you consider to be your children, I guess in this case, Ariel, the ethereal one. and the moment that we read. And I wonder, my biggest question about this is, of course, this is a very famous speech of Prospero's discovering that virtue is more powerful than vengeance. And it immediately translates into this removal of her rough magic, removal of her magic. And I was wondering if you connected those two things, if the removal of magic was a logical extension of switching from vengeance to virtue, or why she transitioned directly into that after this immense discovery. Could you speak to that?
Well, the truth of it is, one of the reasons I was very happy that we took it back and put it into context, we took it back in the scene as opposed to just doing the speech, is because she talks very much about, you know, how is it that you're more human than, she says to Ariel, how is it that you who are a spirit, an ethereal spirit, you're more human than I am. You're telling me how to behave. And you're absolutely right, right? You know, she says, hast thou, which art but air, a touch of feeling of their afflictions, and shall not myself, one of their kind, be kindlier moved than thou art? Right? And then she talks about how angry she is, though with their high wrongs I am struck to the quick. Yet with my nobler reason gainst my fury do I take part. The rarer action is in virtue than in vengeance. And the biggest thing as an actor is you can't approach that knowing that that's where you're going. You have to write, you have to discover it. He means this. This is how he writes, as you say it. And then she says, okay, release them. And then when she goes into the speech, these are all her creatures, her ethereal beings, yells of hills, brooks, standing lakes, and groves. Then she, you know, you demi puppets, ye that on the sands with printless foot, you whose pastime is to make midnight mushrooms. These are all her you know, her sort of her court that she's created with her magic, with her extraordinary magic. Right. And, you know, one of the things that every single time I did the speech, I spoke the speech, I was so aware that this is Shakespeare saying goodbye to the theater. This is the last play that he writes by himself, from what we know. And when I thought about, he's saying goodbye, what is he doing? He's saying goodbye to his actors. And he talks about that in his other, you know, the other amazing speech in Act 4, Scene 1, which is, you know, where he knows that he's got to move on. And so I have bedimmed, by whose aid, whose masters, weak masters though ye be, I have, with your aid, what have I done? I have bedimmed the noontide sun, called forth the mutinous wind, and twixt the green sea and the azure vault, set roaring war. I've made theater. I've created illusion. I've completely duped all these hundreds of people, thousands of people who come to see all these amazing plays. And then, you know, and then it's almost like he describes scenes in the plays. And then the one that always kills me, graves at my command have waked their sleepers oped, and let them forth by my so potent art. I always think of all the kings, all the history plays, Richard II, Richard III, Henry V, Henry V. They've all come out of their graves. He's helped them out of their graves. And the truth of it is, he ends, you know, one of his last plays, which he doesn't write by himself, is Henry VIII. And, you know, and, you know, and here he is writing about, you know, the father of the reigning monarch, you know, actually that was right after she had died. So, but this rough magic I here abjure. So it's giving up. It's giving it up. And also there is release and relief in it. And the other thing too, which is, you know, she's the only way she can do it, or the only way he can do it, is to just give it up and to give it over and to move away. And the only way to do that is to drown your book, is to actually take the book and push it away. The other thing, which in our commentary earlier about the daughter, you know, the relationship between the mother and the daughter, of what we know about Shakespeare is that his relationship, and so many of the stories in these last plays, Winter's Tale, Cymbeline, Tempest, are about fathers and daughters, you know, so much is about his great, amazing love for his particular one daughter, but he, of course, he had two, and how much he loved them. And let's face it, he left them, his riches. So, that always comes to play for me whenever I do these later plays. And, and I'm just going to bring this up. I don't normally jump to this, but, I too am the daughter of an incredible Shakespearean father. So, to be honest, these plays just really, and he did a lot of these plays as well. He was, of course, a very famous Coriolanus. He was a very unhappy Ferdinand in this play. And then he did play Caliban. He played Caliban on television. Actually, I have watched only tiny snippets of it. And our dear family friend, Roddy McDowell, who is my sister's godfather, played Ariel. So what can I say? It's a family affair.
Yeah. Well, speaking of a family affair, I mean, it is, I never really, I'm often leery of trying to see Shakespeare in his plays because he's such a brilliant humanist writer. But you make an unbelievably compelling point about this idea of because I know that there's a lot of conversation about Shakespeare being in London while his daughter and wife were in Stratford, and that perhaps the only way he could be with them was to drown his book, was to go back. And that's a fascinating, it's quite compelling here. Yeah, I can see why it would break you. I can see why it could get to you. Yeah.
It's such a, I was also really blessed, which I think we also mentioned that in the play, when I was in this play at the Old Globe, directed by Joe Dowling, my beloved Joe Dowling, I was blessed because in my show were two other actors who had played Prospero. And so one of them was an actor I know you all love as much as I do and miss so much, Andrew Weems. Yes. And he played Trinculo in this production. Oh. And when I was really having a hell of a time actually learning this speech, he said to me, "It's in you. It's in you. It's in you." And you know what? He was really right. I mean, I couldn't believe it. I then learned it so incredibly fast. And I thought, how did I just learn this so fast? How did I know this? Because I never knew this before. Yeah, it was. So he was, to be with him during this production was an incredible.
That was his last. Is that right?
I believe it was his last. He had been rehearsing another play when he fell ill. Yeah. And the other Prospero was a wonderful Shakespearean actor called Renee Thornton, who played Antonio, and so was really helpful to me in this section because Antonio doesn't speak anymore at the end of the play. She forgives him, but he says nothing, and she lets him have it even when she forgives him. So that was what was really interesting to me, is that Shakespeare it wasn't like, Prospera becomes the nicest gal on the block. She's actually still really pissed, but he gives her very gritty, muscular language when she's talking to Antonio. And it's so interesting that he doesn't have Antonio respond.
Right. Gosh, that's fascinating. Let me ask about this huge turn that happens for her, the virtue and vengeance. And you talked about how she can't know where she's going when she starts that speech. Right. But I do think, let me not ask the person's question. I brought her on because she has the question brilliantly herself. Let me introduce Maura to us. Hi, Maura. And Maura has a question about that moment, which I thought was very compelling. Maura, go ahead.
Thank you, Ms. Burton. This is awesome, hearing all these things. And I luckily, like Mim too, I was able to play Prospero 2 years ago.
Oh my goodness.
Wow. And I kind of had two questions, and maybe I'll kind of string them together.
Sure.
So listening to you, having the female sensibility added into the language of the male character, did you find ways to add a nuance to your Prospera, understanding having a better sense of her power and privilege perhaps than a male would? And then I was wondering, when your portrayal, did you portray, I think you kind of answered it, but I'll just ask it anyway. Was it a big aha moment of, I need to forgive it's the right thing to do? Or were you able to find moments of going in that direction as you went through the journey?
Because you've played the role, you know that what happens, the beginning of this scene is she comes on and she's like on fire. She's on fire. She's got all these plans. You know, everything's happening like really, really fast. And then she asks Ariel, say, my spirit, how fares the king and his followers, right? And then he starts to answer her. And, you know, we actually cut a little bit, but he has a lot to say about how they're all doing. And at first, the way we played it is that she's like, And then he brings up Gonzalo. And Gonzalo is the one person of this group that's been put into sort of extended, you know, animation that was kind to her, was helped her. And so that was always for me, that was the key. And I had, oh my God, the most wonderful woman playing Gonzalo. And that was the key because that she felt pathos. But what's happened to Prospera in all these years of being on the island with bringing up these 3 kids, difficult as that is, fending for herself, is that she's become very hard, very harsh, and probably lacks human kindness, frankly. Mm-hmm. And so what happens in the course of right before this that's, you know, where she says, you know, the rare action is in virtue than in vengeance. Then what happens is this speech where she releases all her minions, her people, her beings that have been with her, drowns her book. And then there's a huge next section, which when I turned the page, I was like, oh man, which is where she basically one by one tells each of them, you did this and you did that, but I forgive you. And you did this and you did that, but I forgive you. And you did that. And then I said, and then you get to Antonio, as you know, and she really lets him have it. And then she says, but I forgive you. And then Shakespeare doesn't allow him to respond. And, but so it's a process. And so the sort of our speech really is her releasing of her magic. She's letting her magic go. And then she's still working through the process of forgiveness. And, you know, so I have to say that I found that very releasing every night. And then I particularly found when I went away to get out of my robes, like the photograph that was shown was me in my gorgeous, amazing, you know, magical, you know, wizard robe. And then to go off and then put on the Duke of Milan, the costume, which I had this amazing gold coat and a, you know, sword, and I had sort of short, my hair is now actually white, but I had kind of a short white wig. And but she actually attires herself as a man. So, you know, it's a very interesting thing, that male female thing. I found that very interesting that we did that. I was glad that we did. We thought of putting me in a gown, of putting me in like some extraordinary gown. And then we thought, no, she's not happy in a dress, you know, but she's a woman, but she'd much rather be attired in more, it's basically what great costumes do is they make you feel the character, they make you feel more powerful. And so it was a very interesting process, but I do think it's a process that happens for her. Or for him, her, is that it is not simply like, the turning point is that she says, you know, the rarer action is in virtue than in vengeance, but then it takes her quite a bit of time before she really lets go of everything. In my experience of playing her. Yeah. And
thank you, Maura. That was absolutely wonderful question. And do you think that, I do wonder, just kind of building on that same question, but backwards, was there anything that, this might be too, I don't know, Strasbergian for Shakespeare, but was there anything that was perhaps preparing Prospera for this moment of realization beforehand, even if she didn't know it. Like watching, for example, watching the young ones fall in love, watching emotions happen in certain ways, etc.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, definitely realizing, putting, poor Ferdinand through his paces,
Right.
in order for him to prove that he's worthy, for my, beloved little girl. So that, that was pretty cruel. I mean, she was pretty rough on him.
Yes.
And, it is an interesting thing too, although there is such an interesting dynamic between fathers and daughters in these later plays. There's a fascinating parental dynamic in general, which I discovered last summer playing Volumnia in Coriolanus, really tough moms with warrior sons.
Yes.
So it was a kind of a great juxtaposition that I got to play Prospera and then Volumnia. And in fact, my Volumnia was very, very masculine. I mean, I really did think of her that way. But in terms of this, yes, I think watching them fall in love, and that's, here she tells this huge, enormous story about what happened to her, warts and all, to tell Miranda what happened. Then she disappears after talking to Ariel and giving Caliban. I mean, Caliban drives her insane.
Yes.
Caliban is a true threat. He becomes a true threat as the play wears on.
Right.
So, and I was blessed to have Mano Feliciano play Caliban. So that was incredible. So, I had this kind of brilliant human.
Who, for the Red Bull Theater people watching, Mano was the lead of our recent production of The Changeling. And he went and did this with Kate right afterwards.
Right after, I know, because Andy Weems. So that, he had to be a force to be reckoned with. He was a force. I mean, and he is the force to be reckoned with.
Mm-hmm.
Once Trinculo and Stefano come along, that then the three of them become a complete real threat to my power.
Right.
But meanwhile, we know that the shipwreck has happened from the beginning of the play. So, the shipwreck happens at the very, very beginning of the play. Our director, Joe Dowling, did a fantastic thing where he rearranged it slightly. So we were in and out of the shipwreck, so that I felt like it was very, very clear for the audience, like what's happening, who all the characters are. And that was really helpful.
I just, I picked up on something you said, and I'll tie in something that we actually talked about beforehand, where you talked about how you actually felt after doing this role that Prospero in many ways is a more dynamic character played as a woman, and in some ways. And but I guess hearing you describe Volumnia, and we actually have had a podversation about Volumnia with the wonderful Lisa Harrow.
Oh yeah.
And she talking about how this is a woman in that show. This is a woman who has had to fulfill a father role.
Yes.
And it does make me wonder, that is in many ways what makes Volumnia such a compelling character. And perhaps the issue with the males playing Prospero may or may not be their gender, so to speak, but not quite grasping that it's a father forced to play a mother.
Yes.
And they may not be great at it.
Yes.
But they're trying.
Yeah. I mean, listen, they might not be great moms. You know what I mean? Volumnia, certainly. Boy, she's got a few things to learn. But yeah, but I mean, mostly the thing is that notion of, women, I think by their very nature are natural multitaskers, if I may be so bold. And so, I know us actress moms, are always doing a million things, like, standing on stage and thinking, did I go buy the milk today? No. I mean, it sounds so incredibly misogynistic what I just said, but it's really, it is for me, I love playing, obviously I play these kinds of ladies all the time, these Amazon ladies, as I refer to them. So it did feel sort of like a natural fit. One of the sweetest things was literally right after I finished, I think it was Cymbeline actually, right after I finished Cymbeline, I literally took the red eye that night because I had to meet my husband in Britain, and I had to go directly to Stratford upon Avon. And it was like mind blowing to have gone from being in a Shakespeare play to suddenly, 24 hours later, standing at the Shakespeare Theater at Stratford upon Shakespeare. I mean, at Shakespeare's grave at Shakespeare's house. I mean, it's just, but all these characters, I mean, in that one playing Belarius and the Queen, again, to a sort of one terrible parent, the Queen, she's so bad, doesn't even have a name. Thank you, Shakespeare. No name for her. And then Belarius, who's this remarkable a foster father to these two boys. So I feel like, I've really run the gamut playing all these very powerhouse, though deeply flawed parents. And guess, who isn't, is all I'm saying. Over the years, or else we wouldn't have theater.
Yes, and it's almost like Shakespeare realized that writing slightly flawed characters is better than writing cookie cutter perfect characters.
Yes, I don't think there's too many cookie cutter perfect.
No.
Maybe Bianca, but she seems in Tempest.
Yeah, fair.
True, but she seems a little, manipulative.
Well, let me ask, because we're getting near the end of our time. So I'm going to have to ask the sort of standard generic question, but
yes,
you've had the opportunity to play so many of Shakespeare's canon. If there was one you could grab, and then we'll ask Mark's question.
Sure.
If there was one you could grab, which character are you still dying to play?
Huh. That is so fun. I'm asked that question quite a lot, and I am so in the moment kind of person that I always am kind of ready for anything, and somebody comes to me, and I mean, because I never thought in my life I would play any of these Shakespeare characters that I played in the last 5 years. Something that came my way many a time as a younger actress was Lady M, the Scottish Queen, and Portia in The Merchant of Venice, and both times I had to turn them down. So that's the only thing I would say, is that I'm very sad I didn't get to have a go, particularly with Portia. Portia was Stratford, Ontario, and I couldn't go because I had a 10-month-old baby, my son, who's now 32. But so I was like, I just can't. And because I'm British, I could work in Canada, and my husband, who was a stage manager at the time, could not.
Right.
So those are the ones I wanted to have a go at. But but in the future, I'm kind of up for anything. I've got my eye on a few.
I've looked at your resume, and still my mind is blown. You haven't played Lady M.
Can you believe it? I know. I was out. No, actually one I had a great experience. And in answer, I know that there's a question: have I ever directed? And the answer is yes. I have directed, and I also teach acting at the University of Southern California. I teach Chekhov and Shakespeare, my two heroes, and then I teach camera work as well, because I do a lot of film and television, as you know. But I have directed. I've directed mostly Chekhov, a Gorky, but I have had the great experience of directing most recently Othello, which I really, really loved, and Twelfth Night, which I also really loved. That was my first time directing Shakespeare. And I do have my eye. I'm hoping to direct Richard III this coming year at USC, should we do live performance, which is certainly not happening in the fall. So that is my hope, that I will get a chance to direct that play. I'm very excited about directing that play.
Well, that is, I am very excited to see you direct a play. The sooner the better, as far as I'm concerned. I think, unfortunately, that we are going to have to call it here. Let me go a little bit off script here and just express to the audience how rather difficult it is for a guest of a host to have to basically carry the sucker from a camera perspective the entire time. And Kate, how incredibly grateful I am for you.
My pleasure.
Dealing with our tech.
Pleasure. Fortunately, we've been on Zoom for 3 months, so I'm a little used to it now.
Right. And I have been able, after my initial stress, I have been able to enjoy just talking into my mic and not worrying about looking pretty. Do you, Kate, before I let you go, is there anything that you've been up to in this crazy time? Is there anything that we could see you in coming up?
I was able to shoot a few things. For the life of an actor, it's, from the sublime to the ridiculous. After directing Othello, I shot a few different television shows, one of which is called 13 Reasons Why. I had actually done that right before Othello. I also appear as a witch in an adorable show called Charmed, which can be seen. And then, all my stuff on Grey's Anatomy and Scandal is still airing. You can watch that anytime. And then I also one of the thrills of my life was that I did an episode of Homeland, playing a very small part, but it's one of my favorite shows of all time. So I was thrilled. And I was meant to do a play this summer. I was meant to be in Cult of Love by Leslie Headland, a brand new play at the Williamstown Theater Festival. But what we're hoping is to do that next summer. So that's the one theater I know that I hopefully will get an opportunity to do.
Wonderful. Do you know when the episode will air?
The episodes have been on already, so they can be streamed.
Great. We can grab them.
Which God knows we're all streaming. Right now I'm watching The Crown and loving every second of it.
Yes. So good.
So good. But yeah, so, it's been to say it's been one of the great things that's been heartening, let's end on a Shakespearean note, is to be teaching Shakespeare during this time. I have to say my students have jumped in feet first, and we've worked on, scenes from the entire canon. And it really is, it's at times like this that you realize that William Shakespeare endures, and the reason why we keep reading him and watching him and loving him is because he is with us at all times. I mean, he is the most contemporary of playwrights. Never ceases to amaze me.
Yes. Well, I couldn't have said it more eloquently or half as eloquently myself. Thank you so much for your time, Kate.
You are welcome.
This has been a true pleasure. You can't see, but I'm waving at you.
Okay. I'll wave at everybody. Thank you, everybody. Thanks.
Goodbye. Yes. And everybody else, thank you all for tuning in. Please do tune in next week when you may see your host on camera. We'll see. And we will be doing a remarkable podversation where I sit down with Chukwudi Awuji to discuss Henry VI, a role that he played in all 3 plays that Henry VI appears in at the RSC. Also, if you are able, please do consider making a tax-deductible donation to support Red Bull and to invest in the vitality of classical theater for a contemporary audience. There's nothing too small, nothing too large, $10, $5, $1 million, whatever you want to give. We are committed to continuing connection during this time of COVID-19. Your support will help make that possible. Once more, thank you all. This has been Red Bull Theater's RemarkaBULL Podversations. I'm your host, Nathan Winkelstein. We end fittingly with Prospero. To the elements be free, and fare thou well.